I mean, imagine, like, standing on a balcony, right? And you're looking out at the skyline of the most powerful, supposedly invincible city on Earth.
Oh yeah, the absolute center of the world.
Exactly, for over a millennium. It's the engine of global politics, the hub of wealth, just the absolute peak of society. And you just assume it's eternal.
Right, you think the systems running it are completely unbreakable.
Yeah. But then, almost overnight, the walls are breached. Smoke is rising, the city is literally being looted by foreign invaders. The psychological shock in that moment, it isn't just physical fear for your life.
No, it's way deeper than that.
It's this profound, shattering realization that the very ground beneath your feet, like the institutions you completely trusted to keep the world spinning, they are not permanent at all.
And that is, I mean, that's the ultimate civilizational panic. The bedrock just turns to sand. And honestly, the psychological fallout is actually far more dangerous than the physical destruction.
Which is exactly what happened in the year 410 AD, when Rome, the so-called Eternal City, was sacked by the Goths. I mean, it triggered just a wave of unprecedented terror. So today, we are doing a deep dive into the shockwaves of that specific event.
Yeah, through the lens of, well, one of the most influential texts ever written, which is St. Augustine's masterpiece, The City of God.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack Augustine's profound argument about that specific public fear, that panic that erupts when we realize our trusted systems are fragile.
Because it's a very human reaction.
It really is. And honestly, when you look at modern anxieties today, fears surrounding governments or the fragility of our technology grids or just intense social fragmentation, the panic of 410 AD feels incredibly relevant to us right now.
Oh, completely. It maps perfectly onto how we feel today.
So we are going to explore how Augustine explains, the mechanics of societal calamity, like why trusted systems actually fail from the inside out, and crucially, where true stability can be found when literally everything else is collapsing.
Yeah, and Augustine's analysis, it really begins by examining that immediate human reaction to a collapse. Because when something massive falls, society immediately demands a scapegoat.
Right, because the psychological burden of a total systemic failure is just too heavy.
Exactly. People need to localize the blame.
Mm.
So in Rome, the remaining pagan population, they pointed directly at the Christians. I mean, the prevailing narrative was pretty straightforward.
Which was what, exactly?
Well, they said Rome was this untouchable superpower when it worshipped the old gods. But the moment the empire abandoned Jupiter and Mars for the Christian god, the civilization grew weak, the gods withdrew their protection, and boom, the barbarians arrived at the gates.
Which is, I mean, that's the standard political pivot, right? You find the newest variable in your social equation and you just blame it for the catastrophe.
Totally. It's a defense mechanism. It keeps you from having to look at the deeper, actual systemic issues.
Right, but Augustine doesn't just write a defensive apology for Christianity here. He goes entirely on the offensive against that narrative.
He really does. He dismantles it by pointing out a factual, historically unprecedented anomaly about this specific sack of Rome.
Oh, right, the sanctuaries.
Yeah, because when the Goths stormed the city, and remember, these were brutal, bloodthirsty invaders, they did something no one expected in the ancient world. They actually halted their slaughter at the doors of the Christian churches.
Which is wild.
Right. They granted open sanctuary at the reliquaries of the martyrs. The historical record actually shows that if the Goths found people in the streets to whom they wanted to give quarter, they would personally escort them to the churches.
Wow. Just to make sure they wouldn't be harmed by other, less disciplined soldiers.
Exactly.
So the sanctuaries weren't just symbolic. They functioned as actual respected safe zones right in the middle of a brutal sack.
Yeah, but the irony here is just palpable, because the people who survived the invasion, the ones who hid in these Christian sanctuaries, were often the exact same pagans who, as soon as the smoke cleared, walked out and started blaming Christ for the fall of the city.
That is, wow. That's just intense hypocrisy.
Augustine definitely calls out that hypocrisy. He compares 410 AD to the fall of Troy, which, the Romans consider their ancestral mother city.
Right, the whole Aeneas connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, in Troy, the Greeks worshipped the exact same pantheon of gods as the Trojans. They literally shared a religion, yet when the Greeks breached Troy's walls, they showed zero respect for the temples.
None at all.
Right. Augustine vividly recounts how the Greeks dragged citizens right out of the temple of Juno. I mean, Priam, the Trojan king, was beheaded directly at the altar.
Jeez.
Yeah, the Temple of Juno wasn't used as a sanctuary to save lives. The Greeks just used it as a holding pen to pile up looted gold and, sort the captives into slavery.
So the Christian influence clearly mitigated the baseline horrors of a standard ancient siege. But, okay, that actually brings up a massive structural question about Augustine's whole worldview.
Okay, what's that?
Well, if the Christian God is orchestrating history and is powerful enough to, command the respect of invading barbarians, why let the city burn at all?
Ah, right. The problem of pain.
Yeah, why do devout, decent people have to suffer the exact same horrors as the corrupt architects of the collapse? It seems like a massive flaw to have this cosmic system where the innocent are just collateral damage.
Well, that question is crucial because it forces a shift from who survived the disaster to why the disaster happened to the collective population in the first place.
Okay, so how does he explain it?
Augustine addresses this reality of shared suffering with a really foundational premise.
Hmm.
He argues that basically God's sun rises on the evil and the good alike, and the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
Right.
Therefore, the sweeping afflictions of life like famine, war, pestilence, economic collapse, they are distributed commonly across the entire population.
But wait, if the suffering is totally identical for everyone, regardless of their moral standing, what is the utility of being virtuous?
So he introduces this very visceral agricultural analogy to explain the mechanics of it. He asks the reader to imagine a flail, the heavy wooden tool used to beat harvested crops.
Right, to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Exactly. And under the exact same physical strike of the flail, the straw is crushed and shattered into dust, but the grain is cleansed and separated.
Ah, that's a great image.
He also uses the metaphor of an olive press. Under the exact same intense physical pressure, mud exhales a horrible stench, but an ointment or a perfume emits a fragrant odor.
So the violence of the event is identical.
Yes, the violence is the same, but the outcome is dictated entirely by the internal nature of the material being struck.
So systemic collapse is essentially a cosmic stress test.
That's a great way to put it.
It doesn't actually change what you were made of, it just forcefully reveals it. Like in the same affliction, the people who have tied their entire identity to earthly wealth will just curse and despair.
While those who are internally grounded, they endure the loss with patience. But Augustine actually takes that diagnosis a step further into much more uncomfortable territory.
Oh, how so?
He addresses the myth of the innocent bystander. He argues that a lot of seemingly good people suffered alongside the wicked because they were, in fact, complicit in the city's decay.
Complicit? But in what sense? Surely the average citizen wasn't, orchestrating political corruption or commanding legions.
No, but they were complicit through their silence. Augustine writes that a vast majority of decent people just loved their earthly comforts too much.
Ah.
They were terrified of losing their social standing or their lucrative friendships or just their comfortable lifestyles. So they refused to speak out against the moral decay and corruption that was plainly happening all around them.
So they just kept their heads down.
Basically, yeah. They might have found the conduct of the wicked personally distasteful, sure, but they spared them from any real rebuke because maintaining a comfortable, frictionless life was their highest priority.
Wow.
So when the temporal punishments arrive, the quote-unquote good are scourged alongside the wicked because they shared in the love of that fleeting, comfortable life. They prioritized it over truth or justice.
That is a brutal diagnosis of middle-class complacency.
It really is.
It completely shifts the blame from a few corrupt politicians at the top to the broader society. And it's incredibly relatable today. I mean, you see a system bending toward corruption, but you want to keep your career trajectory safe or you want to keep your dinner party invitations.
Right, so you just look the other way.
Exactly.
Right.
But wait, that implies the rot was already pervasive long before 410 AD? Because we tend to think of the Roman Republic as this absolute pinnacle of law, order, and noble senators before the barbarians showed up.
Oh, and Augustine completely dismantles that romanticized view. And he does it using Rome's own historical records.
He doesn't just use Christian sources.
No, not at all. He quotes their greatest pagan historians, figures like Sallust and Cicero. These men were openly lamenting that the Republic was morally bankrupt generations before 410 AD.
So the foundation was already filled with gaping fissures.
Oh, completely.
So the Goths merely kicked in a door that had been rotting off its hinges for centuries.
That's exactly right. According to Sallust, the definitive tipping point was actually way back in the year 146 BC.
Okay, what happened then?
That was the year Rome finally destroyed Carthage.
Oh, their massive rival.
Yeah, for a long time, Carthage was Rome's great existential rival across the Mediterranean. The constant looming threat of Carthage kept the Romans highly disciplined, unified, and laser-focused on the public good.
Sort of a shared enemy effect.
Yes, Augustine refers to this dynamic as a wholesome fear. But once Carthage was utterly destroyed and that external threat evaporated, the fear vanished with it.
And what replaced it?
The vacuum was immediately filled by a torrent of luxury, avarice, and runaway ambition.
Which, I mean, modern sociology backs that up perfectly. The whole concept of in-group cohesion relies really heavily on an out-group threat.
Absolutely.
When a society shares a common enemy, civic unity is sky high. You take away the external pressure, and the factions immediately turn inward and start tearing each other apart for resources.
Which is exactly what happened. The Roman historians note that the youth were completely depraved by sudden luxury, and this internal rot ushered in horrific civil wars.
Like the whole Marius and Sulla era.
Yes, exactly, where Roman generals basically turned their own professional armies against the city of Rome itself. They were slaughtering citizens in the streets just to seize political power. I mean, the cruelty displayed by Romans against other Romans far exceeded anything the Gauls or the Goths ever did.
And okay, what about the pagan gods during this centuries-long moral collapse? Weren't they supposed to be the moral guardians of the civilization?
This is where Augustine delivers a knockout blow against pagan theology. He asks a really simple question. Where were the laws of the gods to prevent this decay?
Right. Did they issue any commandments?
Nope. The pagan gods didn't issue commandments against luxury, greed, or political violence. In fact, Augustine argues they actively accelerated the decay.
How so?
Well, the gods demanded to be worshipped through these theatrical plays and scenic games that were notoriously obscene and licentious.
Oh, right, the festivals.
Yeah, the very rituals meant to appease the gods were actively infecting the morals of the citizens. So from Augustine's perspective, these entities didn't care about the moral ruin of the Republic. He essentially says they were demons enjoying the spectacle of human degradation.
But, I mean, that creates a massive historical paradox, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, Augustine is arguing that their religious system was a moral black hole, and their political system was rotting from the inside out with greed and civil war, yet they conquered the known world.
Right.
You don't accidentally conquer the Mediterranean basin. What was the actual engine behind their expansion if it wasn't divine favor or moral superiority?
Yeah, Augustine tackles that paradox head-on
Yeah.
because he completely acknowledges the incredible scale of Roman achievement.
He doesn't deny it.
No, not at all. He explains that the one true God granted the empire to the Romans as a temporal reward for their early civic virtues.
Okay, what kind of virtues?
In the early days of the Republic, before the luxury set in, the Romans displayed incredible industry. They strictly rejected personal greed, possessed a fierce love of liberty, and had an intense collective desire for earthly glory. They were literally willing to sacrifice their private wealth and even their lives for the public good.
It's like Augustine's logic here is almost mathematical.
Explain what you mean.
Well, he's arguing that traits like intense discipline, the rejection of personal comfort, and a unified desire for public glory, those are practically superpowers in a world governed by cause and effect.
Oh, absolutely.
God didn't just, wave a magic wand and hand them an empire. He created a world where a society willing to sacrifice for a collective goal will naturally outcompete a society that is divided and greedy.
Exactly. They weren't seeking eternal life or spiritual purity. They were seeking human praise and historical glory. And God, in his providence, gave them exactly what they sought. A massive, glorious, but entirely temporary earthly empire.
So they received their reward in full.
Yes. But, and this is a big but, Augustine issues a devastating critique of the nature of that power. He asks, without true justice, what is a sprawling empire really?
Well, without justice, an empire is essentially just a highly organized cartel. I mean, it's organized crime with better branding and uniforms.
I know Augustine uses almost those exact words. He calls a sprawling empire without justice a great robbery.
Really? A great robbery.
Yeah, and to illustrate the point, he recounts this amazing story about Alexander the Great. Alexander had captured a pirate who had been terrorizing the seas.
Okay.
And Alexander looks at the captive and demands to know what he means by keeping hostile possession of the sea. And the pirate, showing just incredible boldness, looks right back at the emperor and replies, "What do thou mean by seizing the whole earth? Because I do it with a petty ship, I am called a robber. whilst thou who dost it with a great fleet art styled emperor.
Wow, that is brilliant.
Isn't it?
The only distinguishing factor between the pirate and the emperor is the scale of the operation and the level of impunity.
Exactly. A band of robbers is just a tiny kingdom. They have a leader, a pact of confederacy, and rules for dividing the loot.
Right, but if that syndicate grows, seizes cities, subdues nations, it assumes the title of a kingdom. Not because it suddenly discovered morality, but because it achieved a scale where literally nobody could hold it accountable.
Yep. Without true justice, which Augustine argues can only be found where the true God is worshipped. Earthly kingdoms are just massively successful pirate fleets. They are built entirely on domination, not righteousness.
Man. Let's bring this directly to the listener's perspective for a second.
Sure.
If every earthly institution, no matter how grand, legally complex, or culturally dominant, is ultimately just a temporary arrangement, or worse, a great robbery waiting to collapse, where does Augustine say we should actually place our trust?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because right now, people wrap their entire identities and hopes in political movements or economic systems or the promise of endless technological progress.
And that misplaced trust is the exact root of the civilizational panic we discussed at the very beginning. If your entire identity and sense of security are anchored in what Augustine calls the earthly city, you are basically guaranteed to experience despair.
Because the earthly city is, by definition, temporary.
Exactly. It changes, it decays, and eventually it falls. So to break people out of this panic, Augustine introduces a radical paradigm shift. He draws a sharp, definitive distinction between the fleeting earthly city and the eternal city of God.
But wait, didn't the pagan philosophers of the time, like the Platonists, didn't they also have a concept of the soul and eternity? How is Augustine's city of God structurally different from what the prevailing philosophy was already offering?
That's a great point. The prevailing pagan philosophy of the era was built on a profoundly exhausting concept: endless recurring cycles of time.
Cycles, like history repeating itself.
Literally, yes. They looked at nature, the changing of the seasons, the cyclical movement of the stars, and applied that exact same logic to human history and the soul. They believe that history just repeats the same miseries and triumphs endlessly.
Oh, wow.
Every discovery, every collapse, every civilization would happen over and over again in an infinite loop.
So the pagan view of history is basically a cosmic GIF. It's just the same animation of a society rising, corrupting, and falling, looping forever. You never actually get anywhere.
Yeah, it was a philosophical nightmare. The soul was trapped in this ceaseless loop of being purified, achieving some momentary bliss, and then inevitably falling back into misery and a physical body.
That sounds utterly hopeless.
Right. But Augustine utterly shatters this cyclical view. He argues that history is not a circle, it is a straight line.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning it has a specific beginning, a clear direction, and a definitive end. In his view, God creates genuinely new things that have never existed before.
So Augustine is stepping in and saying, history isn't a looping GIF, it's a novel. It has chapters, character arcs, and an actual finale. True progress is actually possible, just not through earthly politics or, endless reincarnation.
Exactly. And he argues that the exit from this cycle is provided through the true mediator. And he contrasts this mediator with the pagan demons.
How did the pagans view the demons?
The pagans believed demons acted as intermediaries because they were immortal like gods, but shared passions and miseries with humans.
Sort of a bridge between the two.
Right. But Augustine points out the flaw in that logic. He says an immortal and miserable being can only drag you down into further misery.
That makes sense.
You need a mediator who is mortal, so he can reach humanity in our degraded condition but perfectly blessed and righteous, so he can actually lift us up.
Right.
So through Christ, humanity is offered a permanent exit from the miseries of the earthly city. When a soul is redeemed and enters the city of God, the cycle is permanently broken.
So it's a message of ultimate stability in a world that is inherently unstable. I mean, it changes the entire perspective on the fall of Rome.
It really does.
Because if you are a citizen of the earthly city, the sack of Rome is literally the end of your world.
Yes.
But if you're a citizen of the city of God, Rome is just a temporary hotel on a much longer pilgrimage. You might grieve its destruction, and you certainly suffer the physical consequences of the collapse.
Right. The flail strikes everyone.
Exactly. But your foundational security hasn't moved an inch.
That's beautifully said. The earthly city is governed by the love of self, even to the contempt of God. It seeks its glory from men. The city of God is governed by the love of God, even to the contempt of self. It finds its highest glory in God.
So they are fundamentally opposed.
At their core, yes. But as long as human history continues, these two cities are inextricably intertwined. We share the same resources, we build the same roads, and we suffer the exact same physical calamities. But our ultimate destinations and the sources from which we derive our peace are entirely different.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey. We started with the smoke rising over Rome in 410 AD, looking at a population just paralyzed by the fear that their eternal institutions had failed them.
It's a heavy image.
It is. But Augustine has shown us that the panic those Romans felt is a universal human experience. Whenever you put all your faith in impermanent earthly structures, whether it's a government, a financial system, or a cultural institution, you are setting yourself up for despair when the inevitable cracks appear.
You are building your house on a fault line, just waiting for the earthquake.
Exactly. And that leads to a crucial question for anyone listening today.
Yeah, and this is the core of it all. If Augustine is right that every earthly institution, no matter how powerful, technologically advanced, or culturally dominant, is destined to eventually crumble or mutate into something else, what is the one truly unshakable foundation in your own life right now?
Are you building your peace of mind on the shifting sands of the earthly city, desperately hoping the walls hold back the barbarians of our own age? Or are you building on something eternal? Next time you feel that spike of micropanic when a trusted system glitches or the news cycle turns apocalyptic, remember the ashes of Rome and ask yourself, where is my true citizenship?